Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our workshop called Creating Positive Educational Spaces for Multilingual Success. And we are so happy to see you. And I have my colleague Indervir, and I am also here, Serikbolsyn, and we will be your facilitators today. And before we go any further, we would like to first of all do a short land acknowledgement. I am currently on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people, which is otherwise known as UBC, or University Endowment Lands. And you can see this beautiful photo of a bald eagle, which I captured on campus on my regular morning walks. And I hope that you also take a moment to acknowledge where you are and acknowledge all the human and non-human beings that dwell on this lands or on your lands. And before delivering our workshop, I think that it's helpful to situate ourselves in this work and share our positionalities a little bit. And we decided to use this circles, which I was inspired to use by my colleague with whom I was working on another project. And as you can see, Serikbolsyn is me and Indervir is my colleague here. And we do have our common or shared features here, which are our shared field of expertise, which is TESL, or teaching English as an additional language to speakers of other languages, and translanguaging, which is our passion or the reason we are here together, right? And I am a PhD candidate in TESL, but also I do a lot of research related to applied linguistics, including translanguaging, language ideologies, and identities. And I also speak Kazakh, Russian, and English, as well as Korean. So these are just some of the named languages that I feel comfortable using myself. And I have been teaching English for academic purposes, specific purposes, as well as general English in Kazakhstan and Canada since 2014. And I'm currently an instructor at UBC REIT's academic exchange program here. And I have been teaching or working as a graduate teaching assistant for courses on TESL and applied linguistics at UBC since 2022. And I will hand the mic to Indervir to do her own introduction.
Hi everyone. So my name's Indervir. I'm okay with Inder too, or as the kids like to call me, Miss Kang. But I speak two languages, Punjabi and English. I grew up in a bilingual household, born and raised in Surrey. Speaking Punjabi primarily at home and English at school. But I am currently an English teacher in Surrey School District, and I am ELL qualified. I did my ELL certification or qualifications from UBC with their Teaching English as a Second Language diploma. And if we kind of talk about like the education field, I've been in the education field since 2019. Once I graduated with my diploma in education assistant. So I was working as an EA in the district, and now I'm an English teacher. And I'm currently also a PME a candidate, which is the Professional Masters of Education for Queen's University, which I'm starting my master's in January. So that's just a little snippet about me. Currently, I'm teaching um, two English blocks and one class of family studies, which I'm enjoying a lot. But that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself in there. And so as you can see, there are a lot of overlaps here, and we are very passionate about translanguaging, not just as a theory and a concept, but also as a pedagogy, which we hope can help address the needs of multilingual students that you may work with or want to work with. And in our workshop, we have two broad objectives that we would like to address today. It's first of all to develop a better understanding of translanguaging pedagogy and its benefits, specifically for helping multilingual students in your teaching context. And then also we want to explore ways to use translanguaging pedagogy for addressing the needs of multilingual students, right? Again, as I said, with refugee and immigrant backgrounds, if those are among your students. And to understand who we are working with, I think it's important to think about the languages your students bring to the classroom and To tailor translanguaging pedagogy to your classroom context, you may want to know where your students are at with their literacy skills and each named language, for example, Tagalog, Punjabi, and Mandarin, right? And by collecting such information about each individual student, you can build a multilingual profile of your classroom and use it for planning your units and plans. So that's why I would like us to think about the languages that are typically spoken in our classrooms. And I hope you can share your answers in the chat. And you can see a little word cloud here, which I created using the data about the languages in BC. So it is all official data, but I'm not sure if that is something that applies to your classroom. So please share with us who you work with. Thank you. Okay, so I see various Indigenous languages of Vancouver Island and Metro Vancouver from Nikki. Thank you. And American Sign Language is something used by students in KEYS context. Spanish and English, French, Farsi, Mandarin, Cantonese, ASL, Spanish, Japanese. Wow, such a variety. Tagalog, French, Punjabi, Dari, and Pashto. Oh, Russian. Yeah, that's something that I know. Thank you for sharing. Lingala, Farsi, Mandarin, Russian. Wow. Ukrainian. Okay. Good to see that. Any Central Asian languages, I wonder? Vietnamese, Punjabi. Amazing. I feel like there is such a wide range of languages that I can spot here in the chat, and I hope we keep the languages in mind while engaging further with the content in our workshop, because it may be helpful to know not just which named languages your students speak, but also where their literacy skills are at, right? Like, because students do not bring the same level of literacy with each named languages, and we cannot assume that they know their home languages very well when we are using translanguaging pedagogy. We want to meet them where they are with their skills. Thank you. I think it's time for us to move on. So let me briefly share the outline of our workshop. So first of all, I'm going to do the introduction to translanguaging pedagogy from a slightly more theoretical perspective, but also I will be sharing a few snippets of translanguaging pedagogy in literature, especially the book that you see on the left. I will be drawing on this book extensively. And then Inder will take over and share some practical strategies for implementing translanguaging pedagogy that she has based on her own teaching experience. And then we will have a Q&A where you can ask any questions based on our workshop. And then the workshop conclusion will be there for addressing any additional thoughts. And we will share our takeaways based on our work. So let's get this started. So let me do some introduction to translanguaging pedagogy. What is this magical beast and how should we approach it? So I think I would like to start the introduction with some well-known scholars, right? Because it's better to hear from the or one of the big scholars who popularized and expanded the notion of translanguaging. And who is Ophelia Garcia? She is a professor emerita at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And she is a renowned scholar of bilingual education, language policy, and multilingualism. And I believe that she significantly contributed to the take-up of translanguaging as a theory as well as a pedagogy in applied linguistics and TESL. As a translanguaging scholar myself and a TESL educator, I extensively refer to her and her colleagues' scholarship. You can see some of the pieces that were authored by her and her colleagues, for example, this book, and then this translanguaging guide for educators, and another seminal book co-authored by Ophelia Garcia and Li Wei. So I want to play this short video about translanguaging, and I hope that you can note the key ideas of translanguaging, which might help you in the classroom.
Hi, my name is Ophelia Garcia. I'm a professor of urban education here at the Graduate Center. And today I've been asked to discuss translanguaging. And I've been asked to discuss what it is and who can do it. So let's start with the first question, what is translanguaging? So translanguaging is the use of the children's full linguistic repertoire to make meaning without thinking of the fact that they have one language that is different from the other. So bilingual children have one language system with linguistic features that, of course, are associated with one language or the other, but they also learn to suppress certain features depending on the communicative situation in which they're at. Translanguaging is also a way of teaching, a pedagogy that builds on that, on those fluid language practices that bilingual children have, a pedagogy that allows children, for example, to read in one language and then discuss in another, or to read in one language and write in another. So a way of using all the linguistic resources in order to make meaning.
So that's all about translanguaging for now, at least. All right. I think that this is something I want you to keep thinking further on in the workshop. What does all of this say to you about your classroom? Is there something you can relate to and maybe take with you while designing your own pedagogy, which might be informed by translanguaging in the future? And further on, let me briefly outline the key purposes of translanguaging pedagogy in general. In their translanguaging classroom framework, Afili Garcia and her colleagues articulate 4 essential purposes of translanguaging, which can be adapted to meet the diverse needs of immigrant and refugee multilingual learners, particularly those with varying literacy levels in their home languages and English as an additional language. It's also important to acknowledge that each teacher can and should adjust the purposes of their translanguaging pedagogy, for instance, considering their goals as well as the environment, needs, and the key principles of their pedagogy. For example, in combination with some of the theories that you currently rely on, right? Because translanguaging does not require you to start from scratch. It can be something that you can build on in addition to like whatever you are comfortable with right now. So it is very flexible, I think. So that's the good part. So let's talk about the first purpose of translanguaging, which is leveraging, like supporting students as they engage with and comprehend complex content and text. So leveraging translanguaging interpersonally and intrapersonally can help bilingual students overcome silence and engage with and understand complex content and text. I think this is something very relatable to new students or students with immigrant and refugee backgrounds who may face silence in the classroom, right? By allowing students to draw on their full linguistic repertoire, educators can create pathways for understanding challenging concepts and text in English. This linguistic flexibility, I believe, helps all students, including those from immigrant and refugee backgrounds, with, for example, synthesizing complex issues and articulating their learning effectively. For example, you can use bilingual peer discussions to empower learners if there are students who speak similar languages in the classroom. And now we can also talk about the second purpose, which is providing opportunities for students to develop linguistic practices for academic contexts. So when learning a new language, translanguaging can help students make connections and comparisons and ask deep questions in connection with their own existing or other named languages, right? And I think that it can help them practice and play with all the languages in their linguistic repertoire. So encouraging students to annotate English text with phrases in their languages other than English, for example, Farsi, Urdu, Punjabi, or Russian, all the languages that you mentioned, would allow them to leverage their home language to enhance their comprehension of texts in English or other languages that you may teach. This practice not only builds literacy skills across languages, but also nurtures a sense of identity and belonging. And I think Inder will have a lot to say about that. So I'm super excited to hear more from her. For example, students might use their languages or other languages to summarize key points or express personal reflections, bridging their experiences with the curriculum and curricular objectives, right? And let's now switch to the third purpose, which is making space for students' bilingualism and ways of knowing. So employing a translanguaging lens fosters critical metalinguistic awareness, which is students' awareness of language, right? Or an understanding that there are social, political, and ideological aspects of language. I think this is really helpful, and this critical awareness helps students recognize the value of their own linguistic and cultural identities, empowering them to challenge existing linguistic hierarchies and engage in meaningful discourse in the classroom and beyond, I think. By examining like different authors' language choices and discussing their implications, we as educators can guide students to think critically about language and its role in shaping our students' perspectives. I think that in there might mention some authors like Rupi Kaur, who are authors who are similar to our learners in the classroom, right? So we can discuss where these authors are coming from, and I think that's a powerful tool you can use for translanguaging pedagogy. And the last purpose is supporting students' bilingual identities and socioemotional development. So in the book, you can find some quotes like, translanguaging enables all bilingual students to participate actively in daily classroom life. And it also helps students to see themselves and their linguistic and cultural practices as valuable rather than as lacking. And I think that creating opportunities for students to engage in research projects, maybe on contextually relevant issues, somehow related to indigenous knowledge or cultures or issues related to environment, for example, water or wildfires or something like that, could help them view their own language as something valuable, right? And something that they can use to voice their opinions and perhaps engage in dialogue with officials, elected officials in both English and their languages other than English. I will just wrap it up really quickly. So by implementing these 4 purposes of translanguaging pedagogy, I hope that educators like you and me can better support the unique linguistic, cultural, and emotional needs of immigrant and refugee learners. So generally, I think that there are some questions you should ask yourself while engaging with translanguaging. So we can start by raising our critical awareness about our relationship with dominant languages in the field or dominant language ideologies. So I want to emphasize 2 aspects of such ideological reflection that teachers can benefit from. Firstly, it is related to disrupting deficit-based assumptions about language or languages and teaching English as a second language, which may be rooted in monolingual and deficit-based language ideologies. So I hope you can ask yourself, how do I counter deficit-based beliefs around the standard English that you may be teaching? And how do I address my taken for granted assumptions about immigrant and refugee multilingual students' linguistic repertoires and academic performances? And secondly, it's shifting toward asset-based pedagogical practices, which may be anchored in heteroglossic or asset-based language ideologies. For example, you can ask yourself, how can I create a space for immigrant and refugee students' home languages and cultures in my classroom while meeting curricular standards? And you can also ask yourself, how can I transform monolingual teaching materials for a more socially just learning outcome? So as you can see, translanguaging does not really require starting everything from scratch yet, right? So you can transform the existing materials so that they are more linguistically and culturally relevant and responsive to your students and what they bring to the classroom. I think we still have time. So I would like to share some classroom example. And in different educational contexts, we need to understand that we see diverse students, teachers, and language policies, program types, and grade levels, right? And I want you to understand how contextual translanguaging is by sharing the example of Justin. This example provides a snapshot of how translanguaging pedagogy can be implemented. And you can see that there is a QR code and also a link to Padlet, which you can scan and go to Padlet and find more information about. So please follow the link or the QR code now and find the PDF file about Justin in the first column. Let me just quickly check if anybody has shared their response here. It's okay, but it's good to have options, right? All right. I think that we can get started with sharing our perspectives regarding Justin's classroom, especially paying attention to the teacher's identities and the teaching context. Also, we can pay attention to the classroom multilingual profile, right? Discussing who the students are and maybe also thinking about the challenges and affordances for applying translanguaging pedagogy in the context in terms of what's mentioned here and maybe some other things. So if there are any volunteers who would like to share something, you are more than welcome to just raise your hand and unmute yourself. Yeah. Oh yeah, Anna, yes, if I may call you Anna.
No, of course. Please call me Anna. I'm enjoying a nice evening at home. No worries. Um,
Thank you.
uh, One thing that really I always take to heart is how students who speak the same language are very heterogeneous. They can be very different. So in this example, there was one Spanish speaker who came from an upper class family in Argentina, unlike the working class students from Mexico, right? There was one Mandarin Chinese speaker who hadn't been instructed in Pinyin, whereas other Mandarin speakers, yet that has implications for literacy instruction. There are a bunch of French speakers, but they're from different African countries, right? Um, and it's when it's in the same, it's often in my research that I find that it's in the same language group that there are further distinctions and sometimes the most potential for discrimination and conflict because there are distinctions within that language group that even the teacher may not be aware of, lumping all the students together, but are actually very salient in the students' home countries or home regions. So, for example, us as Canadians, we like to distinguish ourselves from Americans a lot, right? But to a Japanese person, we might be more or less the same. Likewise, we might think Japanese and Korean people are similar, but they might think they're very different, right? So there's a lot of the closer you are, the more distinction actually has to be made, I think, within the group, which is a very interesting phenomenon.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for touching on that. And I think that it's also very important to think of the politics among the language groups or languages. For example, I remember one of my research participants in my doctoral research mentioned that even though some people may speak Russian, it does mean that they will want to use it with each other. For example, if you put together students from Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan, where I come from, are we going to speak to each other? That's a different conversation, right? Just because we have this common denominator doesn't make us one group, and we need to be mindful of the policy and politics in the world and the differences that you mentioned. But at the same time, I think that it can be a strength when we are putting some students together because they might help each other improve their literacy skills in those languages too, right? So it is very individual, but you need to consider the students' preferences. And I think that just asking or having a dialogue would be a powerful way of addressing this issue. Thank you.
For the school district, I think the reading article mentioned California, Los Angeles, and the classroom had several dictionaries. And I think that's a really good, excellent resource for students, for student as learning a second language or third language.
Exactly. So can you elaborate maybe what you mean by that, providing some examples? Is there something similar in your context or how you could use that?
For example, I have been working in the Richmond School District for 9 years. And I have worked in the library, but there is an ESL class adjacent to the library, close to the library. And for the past 5 years, there had been an influx of Ukrainian students, and some of them start at zero at the very rudimentary level. They don't have a range of vocabulary to express themselves, and the EEL teacher had challenges in expression idea in the lesson plan. So eventually she asked us to buy 3 copies of Ukrainian dictionary, English Ukrainian, and that had been a game changer. It's really helped speed up the communication process.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And again, you don't have to speak the students' languages in order to implement translanguaging pedagogy, right? And just having that curiosity and maybe also seeking resources available in the community, in your surrounding, can be very powerful. And I think just like asking for help from your colleagues and your community could be a strong way to address certain needs, especially when it comes to the challenges. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think we need to hear each other's stories to know that there are such resources, right? Even for Ukrainian and other minority languages that may be less common in the BC context. So I don't think we have a lot of time, so I'm going to move on to the next bit. I want you to perhaps think about what you can do considering the translanguaging pedagogy purposes and also your takeaways from Justin's case, which may resonate with your teaching context, right? Especially while working with multilingual immigrant and refugee students. So, as you saw, there are like some overlaps between Justin himself and his students, right? Because he speaks Mandarin just like some of his students. So that could be his multilingual identity helping him in the classroom, right? And as a multilingual himself, he can relate to his students and feels empathetic toward them since he has this experience of learning another language as an additional language in the context where that language is dominant. So I think that's something you can think of as a resource, and maybe some other identities may be relevant to you. For example, as a fellow immigrant teacher, or like as a fellow immigrant in the Canadian context, you can also relate to the struggles of immigrant students, right? Or something similar. So that's my own perspective on the first question. And I see some good discussion in the chat. Using Google Translate could help, especially to address the needs. Yeah, TLP is Translanguaging Pedagogy. Sorry for using that abbreviation without clarifying. Nikki, I'm going to read your response. So Nikki says, in my context, I am working with adult learners who are learning their indigenous languages as second languages. There is a lot of aversion now feel to using English in the classroom, even though it is the student's first language. I'm wondering how translanguaging could be leveraged to support these students while remaining sensitive to their discomfort with the colonial language. It is okay if there isn't time space for this right now. I might have to follow up to get your thoughts. Yeah. I'm going to first ask for help from our participants, and then I can share my perspective if you want. So if there's anyone who has worked with indigenous languages, I want to give the mic to you. Yeah, if no one wants to add to this, I can just say that I can relate to the struggle because like in my context too, Kazakh language is a minoritized language which was colonized and almost erased by the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union. So it is a painful thing to think about your own language's revitalization and its survival, especially when you're hearing this broken Kazakh or a lot of translanguaging, especially when you want to preserve it, right? So I know why it may be painful to the learners, but I think that we need to capitalize on any kind of language practices that are there instead of waiting for them to speak the perfect version of the indigenous language that they want to speak, right? Because you need to make mistakes or use any of the resources that you have in the classroom to reach the level of proficiency that you want in the minoritized language. So my way is acknowledging translanguaging as a valid and valuable practice, even if it involves language like English, which is an imperial or colonial language in the context of indigenous language revitalization, right? So that's my perspective based on my own lived experiences in my context. But if there are some lovely comments here. Thank you, everyone. I think that it's time for us to switch to the next bit of our presentation or workshop. So in there, I will let you take over. Thank you, everyone, for listening to me and engaging in dialogue in there.
Yeah. Okay. So, what I'm going to be talking about is some practical strategies because I think for a lot of teachers like myself, some of our main questions after reading research and theory and looking at frameworks is how can we bring this to life? How can we actually use this in the classroom? And keeping it realistic because we, give or take, in a high school classroom, we have 29 plus or minus students with diverse needs, and we're being present for all of them for academic purposes, but also for SEL, so like social emotional aspects of their learning as well. So some practical strategies I have. When it comes to classroom examples, so we're trying to connect students to the classroom and their own learning. So I'm going to be talking about how empowering students to share their sense of being and who they are in the classroom. This is something I actually learned about in my PDP at SFU. Was I had one of my faculty associates continuously tell me that the classroom should not represent yourself. It should be representing the students because the classroom is for the students. So that was like one way that really like is stuck to me, that I need to create a space where I know that kids are feeling welcome, they're enjoying it, and they feel that they can nurture who they are, but also grow from where they are at the moment. So we're nurturing emerging literacy skills in both home and English language acquisition for students. And things like doodle notes and your first language or additional language brainstorming are some strategies that I feel I can use and implement in my own pedagogy, which students actually benefit quite from. And it has like turned into a UDL, a framework in my classroom, which is the Universal Designs of Learning. And supporting students, meaning making through various modes. And that's basically ideas and connections. Because when we look at our curriculum in the BC curriculum, and we are amazing for that, I love the BC curriculum. But when we look at our curriculum, the big ideas, it's about how we're making meaning. It's about how we are making meaning of the world, how we view ourselves and view others, and how we can coexist. So building on off of those ideas, like I was able to come up with some activities, and I'm hoping now talking to all of you, I can get some more ideas and I can get some more ways to include more strategies to my classroom, but also hoping that you can take some for your own. So while listening, you can use this time to think about and reflect on the application of these strategies in terms of affordances and challenges. Every classroom is so different, so it won't be perfectly the same way. So if I'm doing the same activity for my other class, my block A, my block B, sometimes there's changes I personally need to make in those classes as well. So this is just one example of something I do for all of my classes. On the first day they come to school, normally we do like a name tag activity, like write your name, tell us about yourself. Sometimes students are not ready for that. So like one way I started doing this is by creating portfolios. I tend to, and I like to keep assessments in the classroom or activities that we're doing in the classroom, and not letting students take them home unless like they talk to me about it. One, because we're not losing it, it's a little organized, but also because I can support the students in the classroom when they're here. So one of the ways that I was able to do this is creating portfolios. So what students do with this portfolio is I give them a blank portfolio, and I tell them to decorate this portfolio that it represents you. So illustrate it, color, draw, paint, use watercolors, any material that you want. And I keep these resources up for them. And I ask them, like, make it represent you in any way, shape, or form. And the first time I did this, I actually had a student themselves ask me, can I write my name in my own language? And I'm like, does it represent you? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, of course. So it just started off with something very simple like that. And what I started seeing was students are not only drawing symbols like a basketball or a soccer ball or anything like that, going like, oh, I'm a basketball player, I'm a soccer player, like reading or like this. They were able to bring in designs from like textile designs from their clothing and patterns and architecture. And they were able to bring in like more cultural aspects and heritage into this work. So as you can see on the screen, I had students like write their names, they wrote meanings, and like they're drawing and illustrating a representation of them. Because what I told them is when I'm handing out the portfolio, I need to make it, or you need to make it in a way that even if I don't know whose portfolio it is, I just need to look at it and be like, yeah, I know who it is. So even if your name's not there. And that was their challenge. And they have done this effectively, where even if I have them backside, like upside down, I can hand, like I have 90 kids, students in my class, I can hand them all out and I know exactly who everyone is. So it was such a fun community builder between the students as well, where they were guessing and picking whose portfolio is whose, and they were comfortable sharing. And if you can go to the next slide, please.
Yeah, and I just wanted to quickly comment on how translanguaging here is empowering students to express themselves through multiple modes, right, or modalities. And in some ways, it is basically drawing on all the different signs or ways of using different signs to express themselves. So yeah, thank you so much for this powerful example.
Okay, an L1 or L1 plus brainstorm that I call. So this is like using your first language or additional languages to brainstorm. So many of us have probably heard, I'm an English teacher, just going to put that out there again. So like we oftentimes we hear the term the writing process, which is basically you're going to write about this one topic, brainstorm your ideas, so you know, like gather your thoughts, and then you're going to write your first draft. Like you can use a graphic organizer to like create your like the organization of your paragraph, and then you write your paragraph, you get feedback on it, you can conference with it, you write your second draft with that feedback, and then you continue on until you like publish your like writing piece. So in that brainstorming, what I notice is just simply sometimes, or just casually when I'm giving the instructions of, this is what we're talking about, this is our summative assessment, this is what we're working towards, and just letting them know that on this page, while we're talking or while you're reading, if something is coming in your mind or to your mind in a way of a doodle, in a way of a quick sketch, in a way of using even slang, in a way of using your first or additional languages, just write the idea down, because your brainstorming is for you. Make this text make sense to you. And what I found students doing is they are completing their brainstorms completely in their home languages or in languages that they grew up in. And I found that very powerful myself, because I used to say in my classroom that sometimes when I'm speaking to them, I take like a pause and they're like, Miss Kang, why are you taking a pause? And I'm like, I have such a good response for your like question right now. But for some reason, I thought of it in Punjabi because I speak Punjabi and I grew up speaking Punjabi. So I'm like, now I'm kind of like just putting that into English so I can effectively translate that for you so it makes sense to you. So it's a clear message. And some of them actually came up to me after and they're like, that happens to us too. We thought it was only us. And I'm like, no, it's me as well. And I think me being an educator and being able to say that, that was kind of like, oh, if our teacher feels that way and we feel that way, that's okay. And I didn't even know that was such a big thing for students. So when it comes to brainstorming like this brainstorm is actually completed by a student who entered my course pretty late in the semester. I think it was like 1 month into the course. She came from Sudan, and this work is done in the language called Tigrinya. So this student is very, very new to English, where she's just learning her phonetics in English. And so her English translation in the class, when it comes to communication, we're very trying to learn how we can share our understanding and demonstrate our learning. So all of this brainstorm is actually done in Tigrinya. And this is my family studies course. So so in the language Tigrinya, the way that I am able to assess her right now, because this is family studies, is I partnered her up with another student who also speaks Tigrinya. So after this student first individually works and completes her work, she talks to this other student who's her friend, and they speak in Tigrinya. She's just sharing her ideas, like, this is what I wrote down. And the other student just very simply on the side in the audio at like lunchtime, they'll sit with me and she'll just translate, like, this is what the student wrote in the first sentence, this is what they wrote in the second sentence, and this is what they wrote after. So they kind of just like break it down. And that gives me enough evidence of learning for me to assess the student for the family studies class. So that's like one example. I've had students do brainstorming examples for like their creative writing pieces as well in their first languages, and then they write it into English, but they'll just copy it, like staple it together when they're handing it in to me, or make like annotations in English on the side as well. So it's whatever works for them, but their summative piece are mostly in English.
Mm-hmm. Just a quick question, which grade are they in, and what are their like literacy skills in their home languages? Is it always this good? So
Yeah,
just
so for this student, she is advanced, I would say, in her home language. So in Turgenev, she's speaking, writing, her comprehension is very good. I've seen her reading novels in Turgenev. So like she's very familiar with Turgenev. When it comes to English, she's very, very new. And currently enrolled in ELL courses in the school. Yeah, and
Thank you
this
so much.
is a grade 10 student.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So in lower grades, you may face the issue of just developing literacy skills in their home languages, right? And I remember Inder and others sharing that you may use like speech to text, like technology or translators to kind of supplement or support these learners so that they can learn both their home languages and English, right? So you
Yeah,
can rely on
you also
technology.
just reminded me for this one student, we actually came across this AI called Diffit. I think that's what it's called. I might be wrong, but it's a Diffit. It has like a green symbol, but what
Can you
that, yeah.
Can you enter the name in the chat maybe so that
Okay.
others can check it out? Thank you.
So what Diffit actually does is if you do have a text in like a different language or in English, you can put that link or URL into Diffit and you can select like a grade level that the students are in and you can ask it to like summarize it or like translate it into another language. There are what some students told me that there are some errors in it, but they do get the main message as the original text. So when I ask students to like, what's the main theme that you notice from this, or what's your evidence to support that theme? I am getting the similar answers for the same text, but in different languages. So
Amazing.
I'm just putting
Thank you
the
so much for
link
sharing
in.
that.
Yeah, you just reminded me with that one. So I just put the URL in here. If you are, I believe, an educator and they're asking for like one credential, I think it's like your teaching license, but you can get the entire thing for free, which is amazing. So I just had like the first week trial because I was kind of just playing around with it.
Awesome.
So meaning making. So this activity was actually a very, very fun activity. But what I did was, I believe it was just like 3 weeks ago, I took two of the main or two big ideas that we have in our curriculum. So the one I have over here is texts are socially, culturally, geographically, and historically constructed. So this is from, I believe this one is from Creative Writing 11 English. So what I asked students to do was explode the sentence. Take every single word apart and tell me what that word means to you and connect it with other words. So what some students were doing, like in my English classes, where they were connecting so many words like text, where do texts come from, with constructed, or historically and geographically, how those are connected. So some of them had like a well-made organizers. But I'm using the example that I had with the student who speaks Turgenev. But what she did is she translated each of these words into her own language. And by the end of it, she was able to tell me that she understood what it means for a text to be constructed using all of these factors. So she is now aware that when she is reading something, it affects where it was written, why it was written, who it was written by, and why it is important to know that. So she was able to answer those questions before she left that day. So just having her simply translate this and come up with like a little synonym or an idea, which is on the bottom that she wrote, of what this meant to her. So this was like one way that she was able to demonstrate her learning and kind of play with the English language, but also make it make sense for her. Okay. So one of the main questions, especially in this lovely reporting period, that we have is the ways of demonstrating learning, or we can call the evidence of learning. Because to give students a mark in a course, we need to see some evidence or demonstration of learning. So these two examples are actually from another student. This student is not fluent in her home language. So she speaks, actually she doesn't speak, but she at home, their main home language is Vietnamese, but she does not speak it, nor does she write it, and nor can she read it. But when it comes to English as well, her literacy skills in English are emerging as well, where it's only little phrases and words, but not enough to write a full paragraph to clearly illustrate her ideas and meaning making. So what I did with this student is she reads articles, listens to the English language because she's comfortable with that and she has demonstrated comprehension with that. So she listens to the articles in class and then she makes graphics, like graphic novels. And while she's making graphic novels, she will put little captions on the bottom, or in English, she will share her graphic novel with me to demonstrate her meaning making of the article. So she responds to the article or journals about the article through graphic novels. And I found that very interesting and a very, I guess, a reflective way for her to demonstrate her learning. And yeah, that's one example that a lot of students after started or asked me to do as well. So a lot of students started using visuals or doodle notes. So when they're making notes, they'll draw illustrations and connect and just ask me if I can give them handouts with like no lines on them anymore, because they want the space to be able to have like the freedom to show their learning in a way that makes sense to them. Okay, and this is putting it all together. So at the end, it's kind of like, okay, so we're kind of doing these small things. They're writing little snippets in their own languages, but what happens then? So this is one example of the work I see at the end of this. This is a grade 10 student who is, I would say, at a similar acquisition level with their first and additional language and with English. So similar to me, like speaking Punjabi and English. So we're kind of the same. What the student did was when I gave this, this is called a Think in Ink handout. I love these handouts. If it's especially a poem or a song, I'll put it on the left-hand side and put a line in the middle. So students can annotate it on the right-hand side. So what the student did was first on sticky notes, write down in Mandarin what this poem meant to them or what resonated with them. It made it make sense to that student. And then after, use their own brainstorming and meaning making to translate it into English. And what I saw out of this was the student was able to connect their own ideas and original thinking and the context of it, but also demonstrate that and try their best to explain it using the English language.
Amazing.
Yeah. And would it be okay? I think this is the last slide for me to kind of put the PowerPoint down so I can share some examples. So I hope everyone can kind of see me at a larger screen now. But I also do these journal entries with the students where I kind of take an illustration. And the illustration I've been using are from Rupi Kaur. Rupi Kaur is a renowned Punjabi Sikh poet, born and raised in Toronto, Canada. And she's well known for her books like Milk and Honey and her latest journal, which was Healing with Words. So what I did is I purchased Healing with Words, and I got the journal, and there was this one prompt in it, which I absolutely loved. The prompt is to reflect. Now, write down what this drawing brings up for you. What was the first thing that you had thought of when you observed it? Does the drawing have a story? What is it trying to communicate? What memories or connections does this bring up for you? And that is from Healing Through Words by Rupi Kaur on page 17 from her journal. So what I found students were doing with examples like this is when I'm giving out different pictures, like this one, I had students either writing in their first or additional languages to kind of tell me what this picture means, and then translating it after. So this student was a Punjabi student, so I was able to read their entire work written in Punjabi because I mentioned that I'm fluent in it and I can read it. So the student chose to share their ideas and connections in Punjabi. What I had other students, or what other students felt comfortable with doing was first, they drew illustrations. So the actual illustration is just over here, like this person just walking on this journey, on this road. And this student just made the connection. So, and wrote what that connection meant for them. I've also had students who are learning how to clearly and share their ideas and express their ideas and connections with more clarity and coherence, make illustrations and write little snippets as such, like just little paragraphs or journals. Or some of them, they love using different colors. So they chose to just use different colors like this and draw illustrations and make doodles out of their writing. And this one is a mix of 2 languages as well. So it's just nice to kind of see how that is being used. And finally, one of the last examples I have, very similar to the graphic organizers. The graphic novel that I shared was a student who did not enjoy writing paragraphs and essays. So this assignment was actually an essay the students were writing. It was about the novel Aristotle and Dante and the movie Inside Out. So both of these texts. And what's the similar theme that you see between them? So what the student did was he just told me that I have such a good idea, but I'm struggling to write it into an essay. And I'm like, okay, what do you need? And he asked me if he can use color and if he can give me a story instead of writing an academic paper. And I'm like, of course. What is that going to look like? And what he did is he made me a comic.
Wow.
So he made me a comic, which this was actually extending thinking, extending work. And what the student did, and it was phenomenal, is he picked a scene from Aristotle and Dante, and he created the Inside Out characters as if they were in the minds of the 2 main characters in the novel instead of Riley from Inside Out. So very showing the empathy, showing the connections between the 2 texts, and showing how characterization is working. And those were the big ideas and the learning targets of the entire assignment.
Amazing.
Yeah, so those are some ways that I feel that students, with the help of colors and illustrations, but also with feeling a sense of belonging in the class and knowing that they're not alone, kind of empowered them to take a small risk and take a risk to share their ideas, because a lot of them are nervous of sharing their ideas because they don't know how to share them. So if you just give them a platform to share them, they start sharing. And that's one thing I noticed when I put colors out in front of them, or when I put out acrylic paint or like watercolors. This is the stuff that comes out of it.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And from a translanguaging perspective, we can see how Inder as a teacher was appreciating the strength of the students, right? And also sometimes drawing on her shared repertoire with students who also speak Punjabi. And then in other cases, you were putting effort into kind of understanding their other languages by using different translators and other tools, which I remember you shared before. So I think we can do so much as teachers, right? Yes, it is a bit extra work, but it is not extra work if it is something you do to help students, right? And yeah, I will start sharing the screen again.
Yeah, so like the main, like when designing translanguaging activities, when I first started doing this, I did not even know about the translanguaging like framework and the theory and like the entire aspect of the translanguaging world. I had no idea. But when I started learning more about it, I understood how it can increase representation of students' identities and ways of demonstrating their learnings, how that is tied in. One of the ways, especially just a few days ago during a lunchtime conversation, a student actually mentioned how when she first came to the school, she did not speak in any of her classes. And she didn't speak, not because she didn't have the ideas, but because she was afraid of her accent. And that brought up a very important conversation of what native speakerism is. And I told her what native speakerism is. And we had a conversation about that. But also taking the chance after that in her class, where I read out a story out loud. I put myself on a vulnerable position with that class, which I'm comfortable with in that class. And I made some mistakes in pronunciation. And what I noticed is no one said anything. No one giggled. No one laughed. No one corrected me. They're grade 11 students. But one thing what that student after told me was it was very it was very new to her to know that her teacher is not perfect. Right. And that it was like normalizing. And I'm just like, yeah, of course. I mean, like, there's gonna be some words where I'm kind of saying out the syllables instead of saying the entire word out. And sometimes there's gonna be days where I didn't practice reading at home before I'm reading out in front of you, right? So that aspect as well. But also I love in the English classroom using the writing process, especially for the brainstorming stage, to engage students in various ways of meaning making. There was actually like this hold my thinking page, just a blank piece of paper, just write hold my thinking on top and tell students like either doodle, write in a different language or anything. But while watching this video, jot down the key ideas that come to you. And that can be in any form that makes sense to them because that's their chance for meaning making. And all of this helps build connections between communities and families. Students need to feel connected. And if they feel connected to their learning and their classrooms, they feel connected to communities. And if they feel connected to their school community and the outside community, we're connecting with their families as well. So if we invite them into our world, they're inviting us to their world. So it's like a two-way system and it's a cycle. Yeah.
Thank you. And just like what, for example, earlier Travis shared, we can tap into the existing resources in the community by, for example, visiting the libraries or asking for help from our community members and parents, right? Of course, if they're ready to help, I think we can build connections and use everything as resources for translanguaging or meeting any other learning objectives. Thank you. And so if you have any thoughts about the application of Inder strategies in terms of affordances and challenges in your context, please feel free to share your responses either in the chat or by unmuting yourself and sharing it with others. Yes, Travis.
I'm very curious about the example you provided of a student demonstrating her learning for the graphic novel. I noticed that she was very good in her drawing, and she was able to use drawing as a powerful tool, a medium of communication, and that's really enhance and articulate her understanding of the subject matter. I'm curious about those students who cannot draw or who don't draw very well. How do you come up with different strategies in terms of asking them to show their understanding of the learning of their learning?
That's a great question. And I have students who ask me that. And my first question, my little joke answer to them goes like, don't worry, I'm not your art teacher, right? Or that art is not perfect. I'm not going to be assessing you for your artwork, right? So like that's one thing that I say. And sometimes they draw stickmen or like little like triangles and they'll be like triangle is the person. and circle is like, so they'll like come up with different things. I've also in elementary, I know this is a very popular aspect of elementary learning, but they use something called loose parts. So what loose parts is that they can take like natural elements like rocks, twigs, leaves, or anything like that. Or like it can be something in your classroom too, like a pencil, a razor, paper, or anything like that. And it's like in imagination. So I've had students who like I had like Jenga blocks in my class, dominoes in my class. I'm just looking around to see what I have. I have like crayons, markers, and everything like that. Sometimes they go like, Miss Kang, we want to show you something. Is it okay if we like use some things in the class right now? And I'm like, yeah, go find what you need. And they'll come up with like random things. Like yesterday I had someone taking my lamp and just putting it on their desk, because they're like, I want to show something like illuminating, like light. And I'm like, okay, that's smart. Go ahead. Why not? Just be careful. So like loose parts is actually a nice way for some students. And they kind of just run through their like thought process with me, going like, this is the person and this is the light. This person was feeling sad, so they go to the light. But then there's like some like rocks in the way, and that was the challenges, right? So like different challenges. So like they're able to use loose parts as well to demonstrate their learning. Technology is amazing as well. Things like Canva for education. Students can make graphic novels online. Just finding a quick picture and just putting that part online is a great way as well. I've also had some students who said, is it okay if we trace a picture? And I'm like, of course. So like sometimes they trace pictures. Like there's so many ways like that I found. Some students find it comfortable with sharing their learning, but we're still exploring that as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Travis, for your question, and Inder for your response. We have more questions in the chat, but if you want to share your perspective regarding the question, you are welcome to do so as well. So, Inder, do you see the question about
I can ask
the one
actually.
from Sitara? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. I just wondered because I was actually thinking about what you mentioned about note making in their first language and then how it could be like possible when they brainstorm or anything. I'm a French teacher, so the target language is hopefully French in class as well. What do you think about that in terms of using the first language, or up to what level do you think that would be?
Is this like a French immersion class or like?
Well, my question is a bit general actually. So it's like any sort of French class. It can be a core French or it can be immersion. I'm not talking about Francophone that much because in Francophone they usually have the level for
Yeah.
thinking in French. Immersion also, that's not too bad, but like in core French, for example, if you want to discuss a specific context, the goal is that they try to kind of immerse themselves in like the language as much as possible because we don't really spend that much time together during the week in French classes. So just giving them the option to go for English or their first language would limit that practice that we have in classroom.
Yeah, and I think for like something like that, like sometimes I've have ELL students in my English class. And what I do with them is like I'll put on like an audiobook of the novel we're reading or the short story. And I will tell them like, yes, of course you can use your first language, but what I want you to do is either make a quick like illustration or like a doodle and tell me what the main message was in this entire story. Or in one sentence, can you tell me what happened in the story? Right. So like I have done like quick exercises in my like English classes where I have ELL students who are coming in and kind of going like, hey, just listen to this like 2-minute podcast or like a key summary or something of an article. Like 2 days ago we were reading Langston Hughes, and Thank You, Ma'am. And I have a student who has a designation but also ELL. So what I did with the student was it's a 6-minute audiobook. He listened to the audiobook and at the end, in one sentence in English, so he got to like kind of doodle and make pictures, which were like very nice to look at. But on an index card, he just wrote me one sentence. What was the story about? And what the student literally wrote was the story was about a boy stealing the woman's purse. Woman didn't get mad. That's all I got out of him. But it was a pretty accurate summary, right? So what I understood from that was he did understand the story, and then we started breaking it down more. There is also a TQE method. It's by Maria Thompson. She is an educator in the US, but it's basically your thought, question, and epiphany. What I've had some students do is after reading a text or after listening to something, on a post-it note, write your thought. On a second post-it note, write your question. On the third a question or post-it note, after talking to a partner, write your realization of your question or your thought on the post-it note, which is your epiphany, something you realized. So those are also like some ways of like documenting their learning as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your response. And I just quickly wanted to clarify this from like a more translanguaging theoretical perspective too. Like, so some scholars or like some teachers believe that translanguaging should be used as a scaffolding method until students reach a specific level where they can just get by without any home language use, right? But it is more than just a scaffolding method. It is something that you can use to empower students and to help them channel their creativity, right? And in my experience too, I've used it as a scaffolding method that's used only as the transitional stage in learning, right? And after that, they can just move on to English only or some other ways of expressing themselves. And then I reflected on why I'm doing that, and I realized that the purpose is not to produce monolingual students, and we can help them express themselves translingually. And now, as an instructor in the UBC Reads program, I empower and encourage my students who are pretty proficient in English still to express themselves through translanguaging. So I think it's up to you as an instructor. It depends on your goals. And if you look at Justin's unit plan, you will see that there are translanguaging goals or objectives, right? So if you integrate those, I think translanguaging can become part of your assessment, and there will be purpose for translanguaging beyond just supporting learning. Yeah. So it can be also like an expected outcome in your classroom. So we would like to go to the conclusion now and share that generally we need to understand that translanguaging is a pedagogy through which we are supporting the acquisition of the target languages like English and French, but it is also a critical and asset-based orientation toward multilingualism. So we need to understand what the languages represent and what we see as language and what we see as valid linguistic practices in our classroom, right? And we need to appreciate the diverse ways of making meaning and also expressing or showing students learning. And I think that in there you may want to jump in for the second conclusion.
Yeah, so the second one is basically like aiming for nurturing students varying literacy skills and means diverse ways of meaning making. And what that means is, and I think it's like really Anna really nicely mentioned in her last conversation as well, but literacy skills and ways of meaning making are so interconnected, and they are multilingual as well. So allowing students to feel comfortable and nurture their own ways of meaning making and bring that into the classrooms is one way that we're actually supporting their literacy skills and encouraging them to demonstrate their learning and build onto that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you just quickly Google the words here, the keywords here, you will be able to find some resources that you can use in your classrooms. There are some ready-made unit plans and also other resources that may be helpful. And I think that's all from me. In there, any final thoughts?
No, I'm just thank you all for coming, and I really hope you got something out of this, and we were in some ways able to support you in your own journeys.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Yeah, and we will see you in some other events. Bye-bye.
Take care.